Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments. And this is going to be a very small part 12 of my 18,000 subscriber Q&A series. I got to get ready to go to a meeting, but I do want to at least answer some of these questions. So we are putting a continuous dent in the 18,000 Q&A series because I eventually want to get it off the plate so we can go on to bigger, better things as this channel grows. So here is an interesting question about bootleg, vintage, Star Wars figures, and other types of collectibles. And I do want to answer this because I think it is important. I think we have to discuss this in a video of its own at some point because I want to make you guys aware as to what makes a bootleg collectible become collectible, because not all fantasy reproduction pieces become worth a lot of money in the future. But there are a few key pieces that do end up defying the odds, and they become highly sought after and very valuable. And some of those pieces, if you guys do collect vintage Star Wars figures, you may be aware of the Uzay, U-Z-A-Y, figures that were produced in limited quantities overseas. They are quite coveted, quite valuable today because of their uniqueness, because of the fact that they are knockoffs of the Star Wars brand, but they look so distinct, a lot of people will pay a premium for those items. So this question is, odd question, Sean. Remember the bootleg vintage Star Wars Uzay figures and the like? It was not cool at the beginning, but then more collectors showed interest. My question is, in 2025, what does the future hold for a lot of these items? So I want to answer this in full because, again, it is important. For pieces like this, there's always going to be demand among collectors of vintage Star Wars that want those pieces. It is a niche market. Obviously, when we're talking about bootleg vintage Star Wars figures, there's going to be less collectors going after those items than, say, a coveted double telescoping Luke Skywalker, a vinyl cape Jawa, a blue snaggletooth, meaning the main figures that were released truly by Kenner Toys. But there is an interest in some of these items. The same thing is true when we look at the vintage video game market. There are certain bootlegs, there are certain unlicensed games, products, accessories. There are certain homebrew games that do sell for a small premium in the collector's market. Certain markets are more susceptible, where as the market grows and gets traction through the mainstream, there are a subset of collectors that will go after bootlegs, reproduction, fantasy pieces, and the like. So this is one such example. Would I tell you to collect strictly bootlegs? The answer would be no. But it is a good diversification hedge. If you're somebody that is already well diversified, well invested in the main line of the collecting category in question. So in other words, if you already have a large collection of Kenner original vintage Star Wars toys and you want to diversify into an Uzay bootleg figure and you have the money, you have the means to do so, by all means, do it. Same thing's true with vintage video games. If you're going after some of these unlicensed, some of these very obscure Nintendo games or even Atari games, or even if we're looking at some of the titles that were released for the PlayStation, other systems that have come and gone, some of those items are worth diversifying into. Just use caution, use your head, and don't bet the farm. That's my advice on this. I think it really, really depends on the market in which we're talking about. Like, I don't think, like, if we're talking about, like, bootleg Lego products, they're not as collectible as of yet. It has to be more of a mainstream collecting category that is really blown up, where there's a lot of interest in the main items, where people will sometimes find solace going after the lesser known items or the stuff that usually nobody really wanted when these items weren't collectible. And that's where Uzay figures fit into this. That's where some of your unlicensed Nintendo games fit into this. It is a fascinating market if you really want to take the time to learn it and study it. That's my advice on that. Next question. Sean, what were your perceptions of negotiating when you first started out in the trade, and how has it morphed through the years, and what does it look like today? Okay, there's an excellent golden rule I can give you. and that is when it comes to negotiating, the person who speaks first is the one that always loses. Now, this is vital to understand because obviously, if you're approaching someone for an item that isn't for sale, they're most likely going to come back to you and say, okay, make me an offer. Obviously, they're going to want you to speak first. The same is true on the other side of the proverbial coin. If you are offering to sell an item, if I'm an interested buyer, I expect you to name a price first. And you can actually see this play out if you watch American Pickers. Some of the early episodes of American Pickers were great to watch if you really wanted advice on negotiating, because it was back when they were lesser known, like the first 1 to 2 seasons, where they would go to people's farms, they would go to their houses, they would be looking through items, and no one really knew back then who Mike Wolf and Frank Fritz were. Of course, now, unfortunately, I hate to say this, Frank Fritz is dead, unfortunately, but at least who Mike Wolf was. So as a result, the going back and forth with the price negotiation was kind of interesting to watch. And if you recall, there were several famous quotes that Mike Wolf would always say. He would say, well, I can't buy it and sell it for you. Meaning, if you're not going to name a price, the negotiation has to start somewhere. But usually the rule of thumb is, he who speaks first usually loses in a negotiation. Always remember that. And I've encountered that myself in the antiques and collectibles trade, where I'll come upon something that I'm going to make an offer for, and I'll try to see if the person throws an offer out first. And sometimes they'll surprise me, and it'll be a relatively low offer, which would be less than what I would be willing to pay. So obviously, I'll take the offer. Other times, though, I'll come across somebody, and they'll name a price, and it'll be a pie-in-the-sky price, where I'll be like, hey, I don't even want to make you an offer, because I'm obviously going to offend you, because you're all the way up here, I'm all the way down here. So I don't think we're going to be able to close the gap. It's not going to happen. So other times I'll just walk away. But negotiating is a good technique to learn, but it is one of those techniques that you have to practice. You have to get experience in. You ask if there's a book I can recommend about negotiating. There isn't. You have to just learn it. You have to put yourself out there and do it. The easiest way to do it nowadays is online. Like, even if you bid or buy stuff on eBay that has a buy it now with a best offer option, if you learn to negotiate with people in that manner, that can teach you a lot about how to apply that then to other aspects of the antiques and collectibles trade. So that's the best advice I can give you. We'll take a couple of more questions for this segment. Then I'm going to end it. Again, this is part 12. Sean, you mentioned that the graded video game market will likely become established at some point. But right now, the graded video game scene looks like a jumbled mess, with the VGA parent company filing for bankruptcy, CGC constantly ruining their reputation across multiple collecting categories, and WADA still having a reputation for fraud and shill bidding. Please understand, this is not my question. I am just reading it as it is proposed to me, and I'm going to give you my response. I'm new and want to get into graded games. Which of these companies should I be grading with? Do you see any surviving in the long term, or should I keep my games ungraded and wait for a company to come and dominate the grading scene? Well, first, you are 100% correct in your analysis that right now the graded video game marketplace is 100% a mess. We have 3 different grading companies vying for dominance, and one of those grading companies, VGA, uses a completely different grading scale than the other 2. And this is very important. I just uploaded a video on the current state of the graded video game market, because Heritage Auctions had an auction that ended roughly May 24th of 2025, a couple of days back. And I made sure to do a video on that just to show you guys how jumbled this market actually is. So I do agree with you 100% there. I will tell you, though, some of your concerns on some of these grading companies, dare I even say WADA Games, is a little bit unwarranted in the year 2025. First, let me explain. When WADA Games came on the scene, yes, there were allegations, and I want to word it that way, of market manipulation. I was very disappointed, as a lot of you know, with their Pawn Stars appearance. I thought anytime that a grading company gets in bed with a seller of an item, we have collusion, we have a problem there across the board. But I will say to you, at present time, WADA Games is now owned and operated by the company that owns PSA for trading cards and PCGS for banknotes and coins. So they are at least in the viable hands of another outfit. So let's hope that as a result of that, they seem to be getting their act together. So I will give a bone to Wada Games in that sense. Now you go on to talk about CGC. CGC too has had their fair share of issues, but I think you're blowing it out of proportion when you say they're constantly ruining their reputation across multiple collecting categories. Most of the drama that you hear online is from, I hate to say this, some of it is valid, don't get me wrong. I am not a defender of grading companies, make no mistake. I do covet them because I use them for a lot of the items that I collect and invest in as well. But I will tell you, there are flaws with third-party grading. But overall, most of the drama you hear about online is Timmys, Kimmys, and Poindexters that just want to start shit. It's really not rooted in anything factual. Occasionally, there will be an issue, but the internet tends to blow it up to the 10th degree, making it seem like the world is ending. I'm sorry to tell you, CGC is a top grading company. I'm being very honest in most markets, especially when it comes to comic books. I do give them a lot of credit. Matt Nelson and crew, they know what they're doing. So I will always defend them in that regard unless the evidence tells me otherwise. And there really hasn't been too many issues where the evidence has told me otherwise, despite what the internet, Timmys, Kimmys, and Poindexters want you to think. So I will say, CGC, I have been taking note of their grading when it comes to video games, and I can tell you it's pretty much spot on. I have no problem with Wada Games grading. I have no problem with CGC grading at present time. Now let's talk about VGA. You are correct. The parent company, the organization that owns the collectible grading group, or the group in Georgia, Norcross, Georgia, that owns VGA, AFA, and a slew of other companies, did file for bankruptcy. In most cases, though, I'm here to tell you, AFA and VGA are pretty much going to be unaffected because they're very profitable enterprises. And they have gotten an influx of private equity, private cash coming into that market. So they're going to be okay. So I wouldn't tell you to worry about the validity of their business. Their business is most likely going to survive the bankruptcy proceedings that is affecting the parent company. So this is really where we stand. The problem with the graded video game marketplace is that the market is too fractured at present time. That's why prices are all over the place. But if you do want to get involved in this market, if you want to go with CGC, if you want to go with WADA, if you want to go with VGA, they're all good companies. The problem that I have against VGA right now is the grading scale. A lot of people that are going towards WADA Games and CGC, they don't want to own pieces that are graded by VGA because, again, the grading scale is too wonky compared to the simple grading scale that CGC and WADA Games both use. But in defense of VGA, they use a similar grading scale as AFA, Action Figure Authority. So it's just a choice you want to make. I would tell you to go slow in this market. I would tell you if you have a favorite game, if something comes up for bid that you want to bid on, you want to get your feet wet in this market, don't bid over your head. Just use common sense. Don't pay a premium for these items and just kind of go shallow into this market. You know what I mean? Instead of diving head first in the deep end, just go into the shallow waters and just spend a couple of $100, spend a couple of $1,000 and just get one game that you really want to own and just see what the market does over the next few years. That's the best advice I can give you. So I hope that helps. Next question. Sean, since you mentioned that a collector is born and not made, have you ever seen or heard any research or evidence on this topic or theory? It seems like such an interesting research topic. What this really is, it's behavioral finance. That's really what that applies to. And if you look at all the studies, there have been a lot of studies done, like when we look at like long-term hoarders, when we look at people who are casual collectors, and we look at people like me that are more on the investment end, you can see that a lot of us are long-term collectors where we are born this way. But on the flip side, there are people that come into these markets, and usually these are people that come all in. They buy up a lot of items over a period of months, if not years. Then they get tired of it. Then they end up selling the collection. If usually you weren't a collector as a kid, you're not going to become a collector as an adult. And that's where this statement comes from, that a collector is born, not made. You cannot convince somebody to become a collector, especially if they're already in their 20s, 30s, or 40s. It's just not going to happen if they don't have an interest in it. Some people out there are more on the minimalist lifestyle side of the equation, where they don't want to own a lot of items. There are people out there too, from an investment standpoint, they have money. Maybe they collected items as a kid, but they have no interest in the investment side of the trade. And that also is a thing, where there are people out there that are just casual collectors. They find my channel and they email me and they say, Sean, I don't want to get involved anywhere near the investment side of the antiques and collectibles trade. I just have a collection of video games or comic books or childhood toys that I just kept throughout the years. Occasionally I add to it. I don't care about the value. I don't care about third-party grading. So your channel's great, but it's not for me. And that's usually some interactions that I've had with people. But if you actually look into this, it actually kind of comes out of behavioral finance, how people view scarce resources. Like, a lot of men are more drawn to collecting than women, believe it or not. That is changing over the years, but it's an evolutionary trait where men are usually, I hate to use this term, the providers. Men went out and they got the scarce resources. That's really where it comes from. So there are a lot more men that are born collectors than that of women. But there is a lot of studies you can do. I will cover that maybe in another upcoming video. I do know the book, Killer Stuff and Tons of Money. If you ever read that book, I recommend it a lot in this channel. In the beginning of that book, and also I think in the middle, it goes through some of the criteria as to what causes people to want to collect and go after these items, what's going through their mind, how they operate. There actually is also a relation between hardcore collecting and OCD-like traits, obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's very interesting how all this fits together, how you can have one person like me who looks at these markets from a financial perspective, where obviously I'm not a hoarder, whereas somebody else comes into these markets, they're obsessed with it, and they do become a hoarder. So it's very interesting, the dynamics when we analyze collectors and we put them in different categories. I never really liked the term casual collector. I know it is a thing, but I think honestly, if you collect something, you should allow yourself to learn all you can about it. You should really view it as a potential investment. But that's me. I'm coming from a biased standpoint because I've been active in the antiques and collectibles trade since the age of 12. So I see things a little bit different. I was always a collector from little on up. So I kind of have that gene, that genetic trait, where I want to collect, I want to build collections, I want to invest in these markets. So it's very interesting. Good question. Next question. Sean, is pre-AI technology going to be worth anything? With AI being the next culturally defining thing, will technology without the use of generative AI built in become desirable? Well, in a niche sense, yes, we're already seeing that. I mean, there are people that are paying a fortune for a first generation iPhone that's factory sealed. There are items out there that do sell for enormous sums, where people are just scratching their heads going, why would anybody want to own that? Why would anybody pay a premium to buy it? Again, you're talking about a niche market. Let's be realistic here. It's just like when we look at some of these other esoteric collecting markets, like if you see an auction for fishing lures, some of those particular types of items, they are not really mainstream. So this is going to be quite niche. But yes, some of these items, I'm sure, will become desirable. Some of these items will become collectible. The question is, which ones? Nobody really knows. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you that. I would tell you, if you're thinking of hoarding these items, hoping that they go up in value, I would tell you to take a step back. I don't think it's going to be a major collecting force to be reckoned with in the future. Like, I do think, like, when people pay a premium for like a factory sealed first generation iPhone, I think it's a little bit ridiculous. I think it's just somebody that says, hey, that was pretty cool. I remember when that came out. I have the money and the means. I'm going to buy it. I really don't think those individuals, because I do interact with some of these people through my consulting business. Not everybody looks at an item like that as an investment piece. meaning they're not trying to always invest in it. It's people that have a lot of money that just want to do quirky things sometimes. And that's where you got to be careful, because if you're looking at every item that is a record-breaking sale in the antiques and collectibles trade as proof that everybody's investing in these markets, again, you got to take a step back and you got to realize that some of these people just have more money than brains, or they just have a ton of money. Maybe they inherit it and they just want to own that particular item at that particular point in time. This goes back to the argument I made when Super Mario 64, graded by Wada Games in 9.8 condition, sold for $1.5 million. I told you guys, if you have Super Mario 64 graded by Wada Games in 9.8 condition, it is not worth $1.5 million. It's just that person really wanted to own it. He had the money, and hopefully he knew what he was doing, because if he goes to sell that game into the market now in the year 2025, we all know that game is not going to sell anywhere near $1.5 million. Last question for this segment. If you had to put money into a collectible card game other than Magic the Gathering or Pokemon, which one would it be? I really don't like these questions because obviously my answer would be Pokemon or Magic the Gathering. Those are the top two collectible card games at present time. So really what you're asking is, well, Sean, excluding them too, I want permission to put money into a collectible card game. Which one would it be? Obviously, I'm going to go with Yu-Gi-Oh! At this point. Now, do I really like Yu-Gi-Oh! From an investment standpoint? No. There are a couple of cards. There's a couple of first edition booster boxes from Pokemon, from Yu-Gi-Oh! That came out when the brand was launched way back in the beginning by Konami that are worth a premium on the collectibles market. But overall, in my opinion, you can disagree, this is a more niche market than that of course, Pokemon or Magic the Gathering. And again, that is just my opinion. I do know there's a lot of people out there that love Yu-Gi-Oh! That are going after some of those rare cards, some of those rare booster boxes. I do not recommend it, though, from a financial standpoint. Pokemon clearly has the edge. Magic the Gathering is the #2 most popular card game in existence. Yu-Gi-Oh!, if we really wanted to argue, would probably be #3. But now we have other card games that are coming up the pike. We have Disney Lorcana. We have other card games that are even being re-brought back, like Star Wars. Some of these other card games that are coming into the fold. It'll be interesting to see where this goes in the future. But I would tell you, if you really tied my hands behind my back, put a gun to my head and said, Sean, you can't invest in Pokemon, you can't invest in Magic the Gathering, but you have to invest in a collectible card game, I would then, of course, have no choice but to go with Yu-Gi-Oh! Do I invest in Yu-Gi-Oh? No. I was never into it. I never really was drawn to it. I do like Pokemon. I do like Magic the Gathering. So obviously I invest in those products. But if you want to go with Yu-Gi-Oh, if you're diversifying into that market, you're not going all in, there shouldn't be a problem. There is opportunity there. I'm not going to lie. It's just, it's not for me, especially at my age. So I hope that helps answer your question. I'm going to conclude what is this? Is this part 12 of the 18,000 subscriber Q&A series there? There will be a part 13, of course, because we still didn't get through all the questions. Thank you for watching. As always, any thoughts, feedback, comments, the comment section is wide open and it's yours. Thank you for watching. If you're getting anything out of this, please consider subscribing to this channel. You know, guys, I do look at my subscriber count to justify how much content I do create. So the more people that subscribe to this channel, that tells me you guys are liking my content. If people aren't subscribing to this channel, it tells me I need to back off and I can go do other things, live my life, and potentially plan out my retirement, which hopefully will come one day soon. Who knows? Thanks for watching and have a great day.